Hey guys, what's up? It's Marie with Swipe in the City. Welcome back to another shit show. We're back to business as usual here today. And it's just me and Michelle in the house here. Michelle, how's it going?
Hey, it's going pretty good. As you mentioned, we this is the first time we've recorded since the Texas snow apocalypse chaos. So for those of you, I think probably anyone listening to this knows, but last week Texas got a big storm. Does not have the infrastructure for it, so we dealt with a few days where we were without power. Once we got power back, we dealt with a few days where we were without water. Once we got water back, we couldn't drink the water without boiling it. So we are doing much better now, and I mean also that we were very fortunate compared to most as well, but we are kind of both just like recovering from the that whole week.
Yeah, I mean, we joke about like welcome to the shit show, but like last week was a literal shit show. Super frustrating too, just like being from up north and dealing with all that stuff that like literally didn't need to happen. But I'm glad that, you know, we're recovering. And today is, I mean, it was kind of dreary out this morning, but now the sun is out and it's beautiful and it's like, I don't know, 65, 70 degrees. So I kind of am like a whiplash. Like, was last week all a dream?
Yeah, it definitely feels surreal. This Texas weather is wild. We went from like 30 degrees to 70 to 40 to 80 all in the last week. And I at one point, I think it was like 9 degrees or something. So definitely have to check the weather before you get dressed here. I'll tell you that.
Every morning I ask Alexa what the weather is. And I'm like, she heard me.
She's perking up.
Yeah, she lit up. I was like, please don't start talking. Yeah, but I mean, other than that, I feel like work this week kind of went busier, but back to normal, and here we are back recording because we just want a normal life again. Speaking for
For
myself.
fucking real. Yeah, we work this week for me was pretty busy because a lot of the things that I needed to do, I was able to get like extensions on, but they were still on my plate. Like I wasn't able to offload them. So kind of a crazy week. I'm really glad we're recording on a Saturday. Oh, and I got to go back to Austin Pets Alive for the first time in a few weeks today. So
Yay.
pretty stoked about that. If you follow me on Instagram, you can pretty much see every time I'm there because I have to post all the little doggos. But they're doing some really cool work right now. The shelter was like majorly impacted by what had happened, but even though they're still dealing with like repairs and things, getting things to normal around the shelter, they're also facilitating transports for other local shelters and puppies and kitties. And so it's pretty crazy. They're acting as a hub for kind of like this regional disaster relief. So super proud of them. Always stoked to support them and be able to kind of like be a part of that mission.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love like no kill shelters. I feel like in every city like are always just doing the most. Like I used to do volunteering at Paws Chicago when I lived at home, and it was they were always like the ones like helping out in situations like that. But shall we dive into our beer du jour?
Yeah, why don't you get into this one since you picked it out?
Yeah, I was gonna say I said beer du jour, but I don't know what the of the day translation is in Spanish. We're drinking the Carbach Brewing Co. Viva Chela or Viva. I'm so probably butchering that. But it's more or less like a Corona and lime. I was
It's
like,
yeah.
it's a little sweeter actually, I think, than like a Corona and lime. I love Corona and lime personally. Like that's my like summer cheap drink. But I just kind of was in the mood for something a little different today, and I was looking through GoPuff and I was like, huh, it's got pretty packaging and I like limes. So here we are.
It would definitely make a great like pool beer or river beer for
Mhm.
sure. Which is kind of funny because last week we were like drinking stouts because it was cold. Now we've got our summer beers. No, I'm a big fan of beer for the seasons. I mean, there's always an excuse for an IPA, but I definitely drink different things in the summer and the winter or fall months.
Yeah, I've been in like a light mood lately, so it feels really, it's very refreshing, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Michelle, do you want to kind of dive into what we're talking about today? And we didn't do a poll for this, too, full disclosure.
Yeah, for sure. So, we are going to talk about the different kind of like stages in dating, stages in like situationships, kind of going through like when you've just met someone to where you're like hanging out, and we'll break down some of the different ones, and then kind of maybe talk about like where we've been at recently or some more recent scenarios or where we're at. So, giving you guys a little bit of some personal updates as well. Where you're like, shit.
I mean, I got into this knowingly, but also I think the whole like these different stages is fascinating because, and I was actually talking to my mom like a little bit this morning, because I feel like she just doesn't understand a lot of like the bullshit that there is dating these days. Like we were talking about The Bachelor, and she's like, yeah, I mean, no guy would ever date 3 girls at once that seriously. And I was like, oh, Mama, you're so cute.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like we've touched on this in different episodes, but never kind of like broken it down. But like for our parents, it was so different. Like you were only, you met one person, you were talking to one person, and then like continued on or didn't. And I just think that like culture has shifted so much. So let's talk about that first stage, right? So let's say you've gone on like, I would say it's not a stage until you've gone out at least like 3 times.
Yeah, I feel like there's the first date milestone, right? And I feel like and for now, like whether it's like virtually, I feel like some people are still doing a lot of FaceTime dates, so that there's some gray area there. But like from that first date, now you've gone out a few times, and I would say like we could be quote unquote dating, but then that's at what capacity?
See, I feel like dating is like more advanced because I think of dating more of like a situationship. I would refer to it as hanging out. But that could be a me thing because if you're technically speaking, if you're going on dates, you are dating. But dating to me is like more exclusive, the way I think about it.
That's super interesting. Cause I mean, I don't know. Well, and see, this is part of the reason this is a whole fucking episode too, right? Like, because everybody kind of has their own variant on all of these different definitions. Like, I mean, I personally think hanging out and dating are kind of the same thing. Like, I think they're synonymous. It's just different language. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I think hanging out also like implies super casual, right? Like you could just be banging out.
Sorry, Mom.
Sorry, Mom. But yeah, I think hanging out is, and I probably refer to this kind of earlier stages that versus dating, because for me it's like, oh well, it's like it's more casual. It's not, like an official thing. You don't have to have a conversation to be like, oh, I've been hanging out with this guy. But I feel like if you say I've been dating this guy, to me that just implies like there's more of a like solidified situation there.
Your commitment phobe is showing.
I know. Well,
but
I mean,
again, case in point.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, what would you say are the pros and what are the pros and cons of being in that phase?
I mean, I think it's just a natural part of the process. Like you kind of, I feel like regardless of what, like whether you want to be more casual about it and call it hanging out, or if you're saying like I'm dating this person, it's still like in the very earlier stages, like you're really getting to know each other. And so it's kind of inevitable. I feel like that's the point where like there's a little bit less like skipping around. Like I feel like some people, depending on their level of like how serious they want to get in a relationship and at what pace, like sometimes some people might skip some of the steps that we're going to get into here in favor of just like jumping straight into like an actual committed relationship. But I feel like this is one that like literally every single person when they start anything just happens. So that's, I mean, I don't know that there's any pros and cons necessarily. Do you?
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Maybe with some of these other ones, as we like break down the differences there, maybe there are some more there. Which takes us to the second stage, at least as we've defined them. These are not like pulled from the dictionary or anything. So as y'all know, we like to make up our own.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's no like scientific data here.
Yeah, literally zero data. So the situationship is an interesting one. Shout out Jared Freed. I think he coined the term. If you don't listen, he's got a couple of great podcasts. He's one of our favorite comedians. So the situationship is where you've hung out, let's say more than like probably 3 or 4 times. You're consistent. I would say there's like a consistency, like you're consistently seeing each other, but you haven't had any kind of conversations around like what are we doing. It's just kind of that like we know that we like each other because we're continuing to respond to text and hang out. But I feel like there's no defined like parameters to it, right? It just kind of
there
is
hasn't
what
been
it
a
is.
conversation yet.
Yeah.
Like we haven't said, okay, are we taking the next step? And what is that next step? Because that next step, like as we've kind of touched on, it can look different depending on like how quickly you want to move. It's also like what we've called before officially unofficial.
Yeah,
and it's kind of
I feel like
really annoying.
Well,
sorry.
I feel like I was just going to say the next phase, I feel like also falls into that. But with situationships in particular, this is where I think it's most common that someone is still seeing multiple people. Like you might be in multiple situationships because there hasn't necessarily been a talk that you're not. Or like, yeah. So sorry, Blue just is like rolling around on the floor as he
Classic.
does. Like, so for me, the most recent situation I was in was definitely a situationship. We started talking in like November, and we were like hanging out consistently, talking consistently, and yeah, basically we were kind of at a point where we are like having a conversation about having a conversation for the next stage, which we'll talk about. But that I think it was like of like very what do you call it? Like it was totally a situationship because there wasn't a conversation around exclusivity. Like we did know that we were both into each other. Like we admitted that we liked each other, right? We were hanging out semi consistently. But there wasn't that conversation. Yeah. Then we broke up in quotes.
Well, yeah, and I was gonna say, I think you mentioned that. I mean, that might have been the episode that we did with Paul, which hasn't been released yet. But
Yeah.
you mentioned the breakup, and then you were like a loose breakup, as we say. I mean, and I think that can be like for me mentally. I have realized through reading, I spent my blackout time last week, and not blackout like blackout drunk, blackout without power, reading How to Not Die Alone by Logan Ury, which is awesome, and I'm so excited for you to read it, Michelle. But I've learned that like I'm an anxious dater, or anxious attached is like my attachment style. So what that means is like I need like a little bit more of those conversations and like knowing where we're at and stuff, which is why like looking back, I feel like that's why when I do get into those points in the situationship, I get really nervous. And I've definitely like totally screwed up a relationship at that like potential where there could potentially be a relationship just because my own anxiety got the best of me. So I don't know if anybody else deals with that, but that's my issue. That's a me problem.
Yeah, it's something that we've talked about before, is just not knowing and not having clarity, especially if you feel like you want to have something a little bit more substantial with the person. Just being in that in between and not really knowing where you stand. Or the other thing about that, the situationship stage, is that you might think that you're progressing towards dating, and the other person might just be looking for like a hookup person or a buddy, like a, friend. So,
Um, somebody to get beers with.
Yeah. Oh, my MO. I'm like, oh, just be my friend, please.
I mean, friendship's a place to start, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think personally, I think the situationship is kind of the worst. I prefer the knowing. But that's also one of those points where like it also kind of depends on that other person and where they want to take those conversations. Cause like I'm direct and I'm going to have that like, hey, I like you conversation, especially because I know that that's like another way that's going to like ease my anxiety is just like the knowing that we're both on the same page at this point. Um, and so, I mean, part of it, I guess I can't give myself all the blame for like self-destructing relationships because of anxiety, but like clearly they were not also on the same page as me looking back.
Yeah, and I think that he also pulled out a Christmas toy, which is mostly why I'm laughing. Yeah, the other thing that's tough is if you haven't had a conversation yet, you just like you don't know what you can't assume the other person wants what you want. You can't assume that you're on the same page. And so it does. I mean, I definitely get anxiety there. Like for my last situationship, I felt like there was an expectation of exclusivity, but there wasn't a conversation around it. And so that
Ooh.
was something that kind of not triggered me, but you and I had talked about that a lot, where I was like, well, this is based on this person's personality and other things that I know and I've learned about them. I feel like I think this is what their expectation is, but we haven't had that conversation. So I don't know that. And I had to kind of wait till it was like an appropriate time to bring that up, for like a variety of reasons. But I think maybe that's a good transition into the next stage.
Yeah. And the next stage being like having that exclusivity conversation. So we call it like being exclusive, which for many people is different than being in a relationship. However, like there are some people that will say like, oh, I'm exclusive with this person and mean that they're in a relationship with that person. So, I mean, how would you like, Michelle, do you have any discrepancy in terms of those two definitions, like for yourself?
Oh, for sure. When I think of exclusive, it's like we're not like actively seeking out in terms of like dating, right? Like actively seeking out other people. And then if you're being physical with that person, we're assuming you are, maybe you're not, but if you're being physical with that person, you're only being physical with them and you kind of have that understanding and they're only being physical with you. That's kind of not all I think exclusive is, but when I think of that term, those are the things that I think about. Um, Whereas for me, like I take relationships very seriously, not in the sense of, oh my God, like I'm trying to get married. But for me to say, like, I'm in a relationship, I'm kind of uh, like Jared Freed talks about relationship contracts, right? And I feel like when you're in a relationship, I'm taking on the fact that like I will sacrifice certain things, like we're kind of a partnership. Um, I'm, you know, emotionally taking on a lot more. Whereas in my opinion, just being exclusive, like you might you might be taking on some stuff emotionally or being a support system or all those other things. But I think once you're in a relationship, you're taking on a responsibility, if that makes sense, for the other person.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. And like for me personally, I look at exclusivity honestly, and I kind of hate to say this because it makes me sound like a skank, but like I look at it more in terms of like sex.
Yeah.
To me, like I would potentially like if I say I'm like exclusively like with you, I mean that in terms, and I will like clarify that in those conversations, but like I clarify that in terms of like, well, obviously like sexual health is important, like I'm not sleeping with anybody else. And like are you is that something that you want? If not, then like okay, when then we're both exclusive, we're both on the same page with that. However, like I look at that as still kind of having the door open in terms of like starting to talk to somebody. Like I haven't deleted my apps yet at that point.
Yeah, that's interesting. That makes sense though. And I think that's where that conversation is really important, and like being super clear about what your
Yeah.
expectation of that is, because I think it could go like either way. Yeah, I guess
Yeah, like
that's
I've had
yeah.
friends yeah, I've had friends before tell me like, "Oh, I'm like exclusive." Like we've had the conversation about exclusivity, and I'm like, "Oh, awesome! Like that's really great. Like glad you had that conversation." And then mention like after ending the relationship that like they were actually in a relationship with that person, and I was like, "Wait a minute, what?" And they're like, "Yeah, I told you we were exclusive," and I'm like, "Wait, you think? Wait, they're the same?" And like, I don't know, maybe that's crazy, but like, it's, I don't know. I think there's a lot that can go into it. And when I say too that like exclusivity is tied more around like sex to me, it doesn't mean that I am going to go seek out other dates with people just because mentally, like, I'm not the kind of person that's going to say, like, I'm exclusive with you and then also want to actively date. But like
Mhm.
you, I take that relationship step and the emotional, like, ties to that pretty seriously. And like, so that then to say, like, I am in a relationship is like that next step to me. Like, they're mentally for me, I need more steps in between.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. And I think it's interesting too, the way you mentioned earlier that people don't necessarily go through these stages in order, right? Or like in this, like I feel like for a lot of people, they go from dating to relationship
Yeah.
pretty quickly. I think this is an area where you and I are similar in that we do kind of go through, at least mentally, right, through more of these kind of steps and stages, and then get like confirmation of each as we're moving through them, rather than either just like assuming certain things, or going just from, yeah, I don't know. It blows my mind. We have some friends that'll go on a few dates and then they're in a relationship, and I'm like, but what?
Whiplash.
Uh,
I'm like, you just met him.
yeah, what? Like you you haven't even survived like power outage with him. Come on.
I know. And like
Yeah.
I think about it too, and like I mean well, if it works for some people, like it works for them, like that's great. For like everybody's going to be a little bit different. Like one of the other things that Logan Yuri was talking about in her book was just like having those intentional conversations though, and not just sliding from one stage in the relationship to the other, but like making sure that it is intentional and that like actually does have a positive impact on the future of the relationship. So that was another thing that I learned last week that was kind of good to learn.
Yeah, intentional conversations are definitely important. That being said though, I feel like for some people, they do kind of just like
Slide.
move through this flow without necessarily having those conversations, and they're like, yeah. And then he just called me his girlfriend, and that was that. And I'm like, ah! That's
Ah!
horrifying to me. But I think, everybody's different, and every relationship is different too, right? So every, situationship, relationship, whatever is different as well. So it very well could be that I meet someone that there's just kind of that natural flow, and then it's like, "Oh, well, I didn't even realize it, but we've like hit these milestones without needing to talk about them." Cuz yeah. So I think it's super interesting.
Yeah, and I mean we can talk about this when we do book club, but but like the deciding versus sliding thing was something she really emphasized, like was just because like and there could be a difference between maybe like the way those conversations go, but like when you decide to be in a relationship, like it has, I don't want to say more gravity to it, but like mentally it sets you up for like more long-term success because you've actually taken the time to like digest it and think about it.
Yeah, but it's kind of a counterpoint. Like, I think for certain things you can decide through actions as well, right? So
Right.
I think, yeah, definitely, obviously deciding than it just being like, oh shit. Then one day I woke up and we were married and I hate him. Um,
Like those
right.
memes that you see.
Yeah. What do you think are some of the other things, like at least from the way that you and I look at, what do you think are some of the other differences between relationship and just being exclusive?
I mean, I do think like I mean, I personally, so I think relationship deserves a conversation because you're giving that person the title of like my boyfriend or girlfriend or my partner, like whatever. Um and so I think even if I really liked the guy, I would be kind of put off if he was introducing me to his friends and he was like, "Hey, this is my girlfriend," when like him and I haven't had that conversation. So like to kind of what you were saying of like, oh, like sliding and like, oh, just one day he called me his girlfriend and here we are. I would be a little put off by that, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah, but I also have control issues.
I mean, I just think like I think it's important when you're, I mean, it's one thing when you're like, oh, like exclusivity, blah, blah, blah. But like when you're gonna put a title on something, it's like if you're gonna get married, you ask somebody to fucking get married. And so I just think like making that commitment to the other person emotionally deserves some sort of conversation.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Especially because how weird is it to have that other conversation if someone's like, oh, yeah, this is my girlfriend. And then later you have to be like,
I'm
no.
actually seeing three other guys.
Yeah, I
You
actually
know,
have a date tonight.
it's
Sorry.
like, well, it's like when you watch The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, and I like specifically, I remember this happening on like Peter and Hannah's season, both separately. It happened. I don't think it's happened on this current one yet, but like they were like having conversations one on one with other contestants. And at this point, there's, at least a dozen people still in the running. And they're like, "Are you my boyfriend?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Bitch, no." Like he's he's dating like, and if you want to say like you're polyamorous and that's your relationship, then fine. But we all know y'all are monogamous. Like that's just, I mean, that almost seems weird.
I was going to say, too, I just thought about it. Like, we probably should have defined this in the beginning. Like, the frame that we're looking at for this
Is
is like
monogamy.
monogamy. That being said, if you're, what is the term? Ethically non-monogamous or polyamorous or anything like that.
Polyamorous. Yeah.
That's just not the frame that we're looking at this. There's, no judgment. You do you, boo boo. That is obviously going to be in a lot of ways, like a very different set of stages with some of like overlapping themes. I think one of the biggest things um that I know from my friends who that's their style or preference is like communication, and like you said, like intent and communication is like even I don't want to say it's more important, but to a degree, because you're interacting with more people. There are more stakeholders, for lack of a better term. But yeah, so for frame of reference, we're looking at the situationship stages of monogamous relationships.
Yeah, good point. We should have
Eventually
said
we'll
that in the
have to
beginning.
well, we're here. We're already here. Eventually
We're
we'll have to
already
pull
here.
someone in to tell us about how things work on the other side.
Yeah, I would love to do an episode on that. Just because and I've like done, poking around like a little bit of research here and there. And like to what you said, communication is so important in like those types of communities. It's almost like they're better at communicating their feelings and where they're at in different relationship points than like monogamous people. Monogamous people. Is that a thing?
Yeah, almost. And not even just feelings, but I think needs, right? Like wants
Yeah.
and needs and desires. I think that's I mean, it can be challenging for a lot of people, but we've had conversations with like a couple of friends of ours, right? Where I'm so impressed by the way they articulate like what their needs are, what their how do I put it? Like they're just good at articulating what they want. Versus
They're clear almost to a fault. Like they're almost a little too clear sometimes. No, I'm serious.
I mean, what do you mean? Like over communicating?
Like, right, exactly. Like they almost to a point where you're like, oh, wait a minute. But
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. It's just like I'm like floored.
No, you're good.
We digress.
We digress. So speaking of relationships, I feel like someone
And monogamy.
I feel like someone on this podcast has an announcement to make.
You make it sound like such a big deal. I did have a conversation with the guy that I have been seeing for several months now. And we've to kind of like backtrack a little bit, like we have had multiple conversations. We've been seeing each other since August. And I've had multiple conversations throughout about like exclusivity and like liking each other, et cetera, et cetera. And have decided to make it like official. I was going to say Facebook official. And then I was like, I have my relationship status hidden on Facebook. And I'm not even friends with him on Facebook because I don't use Facebook. But yeah, I'm officially off the dating apps and off the market.
Marie has a boyfriend.
Yes. And we're very happy about it. Or I speak for myself and suddenly now I'm a we, I guess that's what this is.
As long as you don't create if you create a joint Facebook account, I will literally never speak to you again.
I will kill myself. Actually, like, please just like talk to me and say, hey, Marie, like, I think we need an intervention.
Yeah, there would absolutely be an intervention, especially at this stage. Although I will say, like, you're very behind on making it Instagram official. Like the first step is just alluding to a date night without anything else, and then not responding to DMs about it. And then the second step with that, with Instagram official, is like an elbow, like a random elbow or like a cheers. Although the guy that I was seeing, I don't know if you know this, but his hand did make it into a boomerang onto my Instagram story.
Oh, serious.
Nobody asked about it. And then, you have to build up. You don't just release someone onto your story. Like you build up to it.
Well, to be fair, like we haven't really we spend we're both pretty quarantine COVID cautious at this point. So it's not like we're like going out a ton. So it's like, I feel like I don't have that much content, but also that's a hilarious point because so last week when everything was going down and there was that ice storm and our fire alarms going off at 4 a.m. And he happened to have slept at my house that night. So he was here. His car was out front. When the fire alarms were going off, we went and sat in his car because no way was I fucking standing outside in the ice storm. And I texted my mom about it, and I was like, yeah, like everything's fine, but our fire alarms are going off and it's probably bullshit, but we're still waiting. So she tells me a couple days later, like once everything kind of simmered down, she goes, yeah, I was a little annoyed because, I texted your aunts and uncles about, what was going on. We're in a group chat. And I was like, oh, Marie's sitting in the car with her boyfriend because the fire alarms are going off and it's 4 a.m. And their reaction wasn't about the fire alarms or that, my building could be burning down. It was, wait, Marie has a boyfriend? And my mom was so pissed.
Yeah.
She was like, that's not what this is about.
Yeah. My mom, I'm trying to think of what my mom would do if I got into a relationship. I feel like she would like ask me to send her a picture of them or of us
So
together,
that she could share.
and then she would share it and post it. Shout out to Daniela Hannah 68, our number one fan, my number one
Yes.
fan, a
I
true
could see that
angel.
definitely. Yeah, I was like, well, I'm like, when am I going to take a picture with him? Am I going to take a selfie? Like when we have our like Saturday days after we record where him and I just like order in together. Like,
I mean, I'll let you sit on that. You can.
I don't
You can
know. Maybe
find
I'll
a
bring my
way.
selfie stick over.
Maybe, yeah. I'm sure you
Or
can
not
find a
selfie
better
stick,
way.
my ring light.
There you go. You're like, this is for
We'll
content.
have a little photo shoot. This is for the podcast.
This is for the pod.
He does want to be on the podcast. He's brought that up multiple times.
I mean, tell him to give us a topic that he feels like he can bring a light to, and we can bring him on.
That's what I keep saying.
So you added another stage here. I would love to kind of know what your thought was with this one.
This is another inspired by The Bachelor. So the differences between falling in love and being in love. First, I mean, like before like I get into my thoughts, like do you think there is a difference as a regular non-bachelor contestant?
So I think there's like kind of like we talked about, like dating is something that happens. Like if you are in love with somebody, falling in love with them happens before that, like, right? In theory, to a degree, even if it's a day or a moment, in theory, that's still like a micro stage. But I think having love for somebody or just loving somebody is definitely different than being in love with somebody. And I think that's talked about a lot on like every, relationship book, podcast, whatever. Because like you can like love your guy, like you can love your guy friends and not be in love with your guy friends. Or I think,
right. I love you, Michelle.
I love you too. My commitment issues only apply to my relationships. But and then it's also like on the flip side that you can I believe you can fall out of love with someone but still love them. Like 100% in my past relationships, I've had that be a situation where it's like at one point we were like falling in love. At one point we were in love. And then at another point, for a variety of, not that there has to be a reason for it, but at another point we'd been disconnected. And it was like, I still, loved him and cared about him and all of those other things, but we weren't like in love anymore. And I think that happens a lot in or it can happen a lot in long-term relationships.
Yeah, I think you have to do something like at that point to kind of like keep the spark going, if you will. Like, and I've always kind of been of the belief that like once you love somebody, like you pretty much always like have love for them. Like except probably like, there's obviously exceptions to every rule, but like I kind of have always seen it that way. Like I would say like I still have like a place in my heart for like ex-boyfriends that I've been in love with, for sure. But like, I just, The Bachelor playing into this, like, this is what my boyfriend and I were talking about while we're watching The Bachelor on Monday, because especially going into hometowns this past week, they're all like, I'm falling in love with you. And like, versus then there was, I think, like one girl that was like, I love you. Like, I am in love with you. And like the differences between just a couple of words there. And like, you can pretty much say, like, they all say it on the show, right? Um, but they're like two very different things. And I think being in love with somebody versus falling for them is like the actual, like, that's the package.
Yeah, I think falling for someone too can tie into one, like the idea of someone. Like when I think a lot of times when people are falling in love, they're falling in love with the idea of someone or how that person presents on paper or things like that. I
Yeah.
also think um it
Or like
can be,
butterflies.
yeah, or it can be really more of like there's just like a physical attraction, but it's so strong that it like makes you think like, oh, I think I love this person, but it's really just like it's, a physical chemistry, a physical attraction,
Yeah.
without it being like truly being in love with like all the good and bad of that person.
Yeah. Well, and that's why it's kind of funny, like seeing all of that on The Bachelor too, is because it's like they've known this person for like 4 weeks. So they don't even like get to spend a ton of time. So it is a funny like conversation starter. But like, I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts on that?
No, I'm curious, do you believe in love
Uh-oh.
at first sight?
Or should I walk by again? um, eh, I want to, like, the Disney princess, like, buried deep in my heart wants to say yes, but like the evil witch villain that has lived for the past 29 years knows better. That was kind of fucked up, but
I don't think it's like princess versus evil. I think it's, when I think about like having been in love and having gone through heartbreak, which was the most like intense thing. Oh, I don't know. But having gone through that, I my definition, or what I would say, is like of love has changed. And when I think of like love, I think about, again, really knowing and accepting like the good and the bad of someone. Like I think about like both sets of my parents, and like my mom and stepdad, for example, like, they have their shit, they have their issues, but at the end of the day, they like work through it together. And like just the way that my stepdad looks at my mom, even when she's being a little extra. Mom, we've talked about this. Sometimes you're a little extra, we love you. Um,
we
but
all are sometimes.
to me, love is how you communicate and work together in the hard moments, more than it is your, vacation to Tulum or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that to me is what, like, more about like what is like true love than just the like, oh, we're in our honeymoon stages.
I think love is a verb. I think it's an action more so than a feeling. I think that's a really good point. That it's definitely like falling in love is a lot of those like initial feelings. And I think when you say or you hear like it was love at first sight, yeah, I mean, I just don't fully buy it. Like I love the idea of it. But I think to your point, like real love is all the other stuff practically.
Yeah. Yeah. I also, I mean, but then on the flip side, I don't know, maybe someday someone is going to see me in my like Austin Petzelev shirt drinking
And your
IPA
galoshes.
and in my galoshes, like sitting at Nomadic and chatting up a stranger. And they're going to be like, oh my God, this bitch embodies everything I'm looking for.
We can only hope. We can only hope.
And then they're going to be like, oh, wait, she's fucking crazy. Then we'll know.
And then they'll have to love you for your crazy too.
It's
and
true.
At the end of the day, isn't that what it is?
It is. It's all of it.
Yeah, it's the whole package. Well, I want to say we did it again, but we can't copy you up. How many times have we mentioned Jared Freed this episode?
Not as many as usual, but it's also a shorter episode.
Yeah. Well, any final words?
No, I would just love, as always, like to hear other people's perspectives and feedback on this. We'll probably, especially if we do get feedback, we'd love to do a follow-up and share other stories too of, maybe I think a follow-up could also be like actionable, like, oh, how do you get from situationship to relationship, and maybe talking through some more of those things. But I think we covered what we were hoping to today, and it's hopefully nice. I'm gonna go get a beverage and treat myself.
Treat yourself. Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. I'd love to do a follow-up on this. If anybody has like any thoughts, y'all know, slide into our DMs at Swipe and the City on literally every platform. Me personally, you can find me at Marie R. Carlson. And Michelle?
M. Craig PDX.
And that's a wrap, y'all. Cheers.
Cheers.